let's jump in and have a look at this horizon. This is our disaster. I was going to say Disney recovery, but it's our disaster recovery and business continuity planning process. So these are the things that we need to take into consideration anytime we go into our business continuity planning process and defining each of these key areas, as well as our DR. So let's just jump in and have a quick look at defining all these parameters. So the very first thing when we look at our process itself, what we first will need to assign ownership. Right, that's our very first step. I'll just put ownership here, and that's our first step. Because when we do this, we need to have accountability. We need to have buy-in. Who has ownership of our business continuity and our DR planning? Right, both are quite similar, and quite a few overlap, along with our processes overlap as well, which is a good thing. But sometimes we need to identify who will be accountable for these plans and who will have the ownership. And obviously, at that point, we can start to then define the actual rest of the process. So the first thing is the ownership, and we have to tag this with a team, with people, and basically define who's going to own this plan, right? So that's the first step. Then once we've gone into that planning process and we've assigned our ownership, well, we're going to look at developing a policy. So number two is policy. And this is we're going to go away and pretty much develop a policy for each. So we're going to have a look at every program or anything we're going to go do within our business or our infrastructure or technology. There's going to have to be a policy around that that defines basically a couple of things, right? So it's going to have our purpose. So exactly what this is for and about. So this, what the purpose is, and it basically has going to state our DI and our BCP processes. So what our targets are, what are we, why are we doing this? What's the purpose or what's the nature of this? So you'll go away and define what they look like within the organization, within the industry, and that's the purpose. From there, we've got the scope. So this is the extent of our testing. So we need to identify the scope of the planning, what that will cover. So is this going to be the entire organization? Or is this going to be maybe specific parts of the organization? Is this going to be specific locations or remote offices? Is this going to be a new company that we've acquired? We need to define what that scope is, and we have to obviously come to the realization of what that looks like as well. Um, Most likely in many organizations, when we do our policy development for our BCP and DR planning, it's around the entire organization takes part in this, but then obviously we have to define and obviously have our policy that determines what the extent of our scope is, very meticulously and detailed as well. So just obviously being aware of the scope has to be in there. And then finally, the authority of the program. So authority, and this is someone within the program that has the jurisdiction and that authority, basically saying, well, what authority does the program or those running the program have? They obviously can go away and make decisions on behalf of the organization. There's no point saying, yes, go away and do it. And every 3 minutes, you have to be, bombarded by someone to give you approval and authority. You have to go away and assign the authority, give them, a certain, you know, budget and requirements that they can go away and then make decisions based on the business. So you got to go away and have that authority then established and obviously built with the program. So there's sort of the three considerations that you need to have when you're building out your policy. You have your purpose, your scope, and then obviously your authority of the program. Now the second part of this is, and I'm just going to put number three here, is our BIA. Now I kind of mentioned BIA, business impact analysis, before. We're going to sort of jump into a little bit more and sort of you'll start to see how this all kind of works together. So now that we have our ownership, we've assigned something to, we've got the ownership of the program, then we've got our policy assigned to that. Now there's two separate plans um, that someone who's going and has to be obviously accountable with this, right? So they're going to have to go away and complete step one, create the policy, and then now we're going to execute that business impact analysis. So we need to identify key business processes and take that list and prioritize it. So this is going to be a list of our processes and how we do business and what's unique to the business, and you basically do a criticality assessment where you go away and you start defining what are those key business processes and what they look like. So if things go offline for certain x amount of period, then you start defining what the impact is to the business, and you obviously have different parties and different people involved in that process, and these are typically again those key processes that basically what keeps the business alive and functioning the way the business does or requires to function, right? So these things that every day that run the business the way it needs to run. And then we basically have our statement of impact. So second part here is our statement of impact. And the statement of impact is all about basically listing out those items. And then we define basically what happens if we lose those items. So the statement of impact again is going back and forth. So this kind of go hand in hand where you have your list of prioritized assets. And then the statement of impact defines if we lose service to those critical functions, what happens? Is it an email capability and we can no longer email out, emails out anymore? Is this a product or a certain piece of, certain piece of product itself? So is this maybe our manufacturing supply chain shuts down for X amount of time? What does that mean to the business? So basically meaning we define if we lose certain service to those functions, what happens? And you have time sensitivity to it as well as our impact. That's obviously our business impact analysis. So defining how the business will be impacted and what the criticality rating would be, right? So we define what they are. Step four, we take our BIA and we take our list of impacts and we take our prioritized list of critical assets that we have, and then we do something along the lines of critical. Just clean that up a little bit. So critical analysis, that's right, and for sure. So critical analysis is all about applying the analysis of the risk associated with those key, and I'll say key because they are key business processes. So we analyze those risks associated with impacts and obviously those procedures, and then we define a couple of things here. We've spoken about these before: our likelihood and our impact. So what's the rating of the scoring based on what we define what they are? And we have our risk rating. And these are just some terms that we're going to look at in just a moment. So don't keep your eyes here. So these are things that we can go away and we create a scoring program. So we can have our scoring metrics, 1 to 5. So 1 to 5, and 5 is critical. And then we can start defining what on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 or whatever the likelihood and the impact is, what's the risk and likelihood, and we come up with that value that represents our critical analysis. So if all our assets are going to be a 5, well, then that's critical. So then we'll have all our list of assets at a critical impact of 5 in that case. So you go away and you apply some risk analysis methods, like you define your risk, you define your likelihood of impact, and then you have that scale where you come back and say, well, on a scale of 1 to 3 or a scale of 1 to 5, we can take risk X and the likelihood of that, and then we come up with a value that represents our critical analysis pretty much. And then we have our critical analysis done and completed, and then you have a document that outlines, XYZ function with a criticality rating of 5. Yeah, and then you have the rest of your outlines based on what they are. Could be 5, could be 3, and the rest of 3. XYZ. So you sort of define what they look like, and that's a living document. Again, it gets updated, and you constantly run your business impact analysis and your critical analysis quite hand in hand. Now, from there, once we've defined our critical thinking and we've done our analysis and risk management sort of techniques and strategies, we jump into what we call I'm going to write here, our recovery goals. And this is where we define a couple of things. Now, we have to define, obviously, by performing our critical analysis, the first step, and then we define what impact and the likelihood of those given scenarios are and what services are. So obviously the services that are backing those things up as well once we do our IT analysis. Now we need to establish basically what the recovery goals are. Now recovery within X, so we have to define obviously time, because time sensitivity, right? If something is down for 19 hours or 12 hours or 1 hour, um, we obviously need to know the impact of that, right? So because now that we do know the impact, well, then we have to obviously triage that and take that reflective based on, well, what's the likelihood that it's going to occur? And if it does go down, well, then how much support can then we tolerate? And now these where some terms are going to come into play, and we're going to talk about them because it's vital that you kind of know a little bit about these terms as we're sort of going through the recovery planning and the goal sort of setting. So MTD is a term that's called the maximum tolerable downtime. And this is basically what's the maximum amount of time or downtime essentially that the business can afford to lose but still survive. So if the business is out for 6 hours, okay, that's not a good thing, but then we can still survive. So we determine a maximum tolerable downtime. That way, once we know what that looks like, however long that business is down for, and it can still survive. And that's the whole meaning of sort of the MTD. MTO, so a maximum tolerable outage. So this is per outage, and kind of think of this as per event, and I'll say per outage, because this is unique to each of those situations. Now, if this is a power outage, if this is a service inoperability outage, if this is a supplier outage, for individual services or per services of those outages, we have to define that of each services that we identified through our BIA. So this is our BIA that we've identified. And then obviously we've done our critical thinking against it. and then we define those different values of what those recovery goals are. So if in our business impact analysis, we've gone away and we say, look, we've got our payroll. I'll just give it some terms here. So we've got our payroll platform. Now, our payroll platform, we could go 3 days without this being affected, and we'll still be okay because 3 days is not going to affect anyone. But if our shipment of our orders comes in, and our MTD for our shipment, so this is our MTD for payroll, so which is 3, and then if I just do thing here, and then we just do shipment. So maybe our shipment of orders, and we've got an MTD of maybe, so this is 3 days, to be clear. This could be maybe something like 4 hours. So this is mission critical. So now that kind of is a lower sort of threshold where we could go with payroll without 3 days and it won't really affect anything because obviously, maybe we run payroll twice a month or whatever the case is. So 3 days is kind of the maximum it can be out for, versus the orders of maybe our inventory for shipments, right? Which will have maybe that MTD of 4. So because it's a higher impact, for example, the higher obviously it would affect that customer shipments and stuff like that. So that's obviously got now a higher level of focus because that's now a more critical component than maybe payroll in this example. So that's kind of defining the two differences in sort of a nutshell. Now the other component here is our RTO. And I kind of got sidetracked there because I was thinking of maybe should I mention something else, but I think I've kind of mentioned everything. And if anything sort of comes back to my mind, I will go back and we'll revisit it. But RTO is our recovery time objective, and RTO is all about basically defining or having an objective for how long we want to be down. So how long to be down. And we define this by obviously, we have the goals of our outage, what they are. Now, if our RTO, for an example, like if it's 4 hours for our shipment order, and that's our RTO in this case, then we want to be back up and running within that 4-hour threshold. So this just basically says, well, how long do we want to effectively be down, and then we want to make sure that our goals reflect that our RTO, our recovery time objective in this case, is back up and running within that 4-hour threshold. Obviously, you'll have time sensitivity around that. So if we go exceeding that to maybe 6 hours, you have to define how that looks as well. But RTO is all about defining how long are we going to be out for in that specific outage. And it's, again, going back to that per outage sort of scenario. Recovery point objective, so RPO, our point objective. Everything in these terms, when we start talking about RPO, essentially is the amount that we're willing to lose in relation to the data loss. So because backups run in different maybe periods, if our backups run maybe every 6 hours, and then we could lose potentially that 6 hours of downtime or that 6 hours of the data, right? So in this case, you define basically the appetite or how much data we're willing to lose in that process to maybe to become back up and restored. So again, if we're running that backup scenario and we have to go back to another site and recover from those backups and we lose 6 hours of data, then that could be detrimental to the organization. So you have to define what the appetite looks like, and our RPO helps us do that. Our final one here is our RCAPO. So RCAPO, and this is our recovery or our recover capacity objective. And this is all about dealing with workarounds. So how long can we work around in a specific state and still be effective? So this is all about recovery and how we're going to work, basically the workarounds, right? And obviously the business will still run and function without being affected. So there's some terms just to be mindful of. We're going to cover some more details throughout these video series, but just be aware of those terms for now. So our recovery goals are all sort of subjective to these terms, right? So we've got to go away and determine what our MTD is, what our RPO is, and then once we start defining all these, then we'll have our plan and obviously our strategy goals. And I'll continue through this sort of the process because there's more to cover. Now from there, so we've got our recovery goals. Now we're going to go into our recovery strategy. So we've gone away, we've done our BIA, we've done our critical analysis, we've defined our goals of what they're going to look like. Now our plans and goals is, well, a strategy itself is including basically saying that we're going to identify our recovery. So I'm going to put recovery, solution, and planning. because this is where we're going to go away and pretty much do everything and determine um, everything that we need to do today to basically get to our recovery goals. So this is our strategy, this is our planning. This is if we need to go buy new systems, buy new services, we're going to contact our DR provider, we're going to run some testing, and we're going to talk about testing and training and stuff like that in the next step up. But this is us going away and actually doing that, right? Putting out the strategy together. So typically you have something, and this is what I do when I do this with customers, we kind of do like the four futures, and we've got today, and then you got something like this, which is now, and then you kind of break this out into, what worst case looks like. This is worst case, and then you kind of you kind of color tag these to make things a little bit pretty. And this is just sort of me going at this, quite quickly. But in these sort of sessions, you're kind of spending, some time to sort of define, what each of these goals look like, and you start defining, what is that's worst case scenario. This is today. What does good look like, and what's ultimately ideal, right? And then you start obviously, coloring these in. And then we start defining each of these parameters. So this is today, we're on this line. And then from here, you start defining objectives. So what's the North Star to the business, and how do we get to where we need to go to? And basically all the things that we're going to do in between getting there. So if this is our ideal path and we have to get there, then what do we need to do to meet our objectives, right? We have to identify our solutions. So I'm just going to put ID solutions because we're going to go away and identify what they are, of course. Um, and then we've got to meet those recovery goals. Our recovery time objective is 6 hours. Then we need to have a solution in plan that can help us recover in 6 hours, right? So if I'm just going to put our RTO is 6 hours and we have to recover, or that business function has to recover within 6 hours, then the solution itself has to reflect that and has to help us, enable us to flip over and recover in less than 6 hours, right? So if things are typically the lower that we go with the RTO, obviously that drives up our costs, right? And we're going to have sub-second, or sub-millisecond switchovers and stuff like that. And we'll talk more around sort of the DR stuff a little bit later, but um, typically the lower that RTO is when we start talking about our recovery time objective, that's where things cost obviously more money, right? So we're obviously going to have to pay for those technologies to help us. Otherwise, if backups work correctly and our RTO is maybe 15 hours or 24 hours and we can wait a whole day, then that's fine. If that's the appetite of the business, then we have to obviously, take that into account as well, right? So no business is going to be spending money or don't have the luxury of unforeseen budgets as well. So we have to work within our means and determine what's critical and what's not, and then obviously signing off on what that risk appetite looks like, and ensuring that everyone is aware of how long things are going to take to obviously recover if there's an event. So once we define our strategies and our plans, and we obviously know what our solutions are, then we need to move on. And if I do a bit of a drum roll, please. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. That's a nice drum roll. And we move over from so we've done our recovery and strategy, and then we're going to go into our testing. So this is our testing, and I'll put training as well because we're going to have to do training, right? And this is where we're going to go away within the business and do a couple of things, right? For testing, we have to ensure that we're testing our recovery plans, right? And we can do this through a number of means, and I'll walk through them later. Um, we don't want something to occur and obviously fail, and then no one knows what to do, right? So that's going to be bad. So we need to make sure that things are tested, they're documented, any challenges or issues or shortcomings, then we know what to do about them, so they don't become an unforeseen issue. Now, for training, we also need to train people as well. We need to train those in the plans. So when we have our document and our plan, and then we document out, who's part of that process, and then everyone knows their roles and their functions and their responsibilities and what everyone is going to do in the time of an event or of a crisis. Then we have to test that out and verify that that plan is going to work and it's good and it's tested. And if there's lessons learned that come out of it, then we know what to do, right? So that's part of that whole process. So we have to take in all our responsible people. So I'm just going to put a tag up here so I can just draw out some things because I'm running out of space. So you have a bit of a document here, and in your document you have, a section that's called, let's do section 3, and this is roles and responsibilities. And then you'll have a little bit of a table, or depending on the layout of the business, and you have person's name, you have their title, you have the contact number, and you have a description on, what their role is essentially, or the ownership of the role and what they're going to be doing. right? And this is going to obviously determine three key things. It's going to determine da, 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 who is involved, what we are going to do, and the last one, how we plan on doing that. And that's what that document is. It defines all those three things, and we take into responsibility the people that are accountable for that, right? We need to identify the roles, the responsibilities within the plan and the planning and the strategy, and then we assign those responsibilities to those functions of those people. And then obviously we provide them with training and enablement, and we ensure that the plan works to what we're putting in down to paper as well. So that's our training and obviously our testing. And then finally, as I move on into this gray field here, in this green field over here, finally is our documentation. I'll just put doc for short. Um, this is maintaining our plans and documenting everything. Now, this is something like our risk register. This is a living document, right? Which means it's going to be changing, and as people change and people leave their jobs and getting to and new people come into the business, we have to train them, we have to document and update so everyone knows what to do. If we're now changing the roles and the responsibilities, new systems, new processes added to those systems, new business functions, all these things that need to be built into our DR and our BCP planning and strategizing, they will all have to be restored eventually, right? So they become part of that DR process and the BCP process, the business continuity process. So they need to be restored as all these new systems and people and infrastructure come in. Things need to be restored in that timely manner, right? And we go away and we define that. And obviously, they have to meet our objective and our goals, and obviously reducing that impact and the risk. I just keep highlighting risk because it's risk within our business. So that sums up a quite of a lengthy video. I didn't want to go that much over time, but kind of jumps into that DR and the BC, the business continuity process. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If there's any other comments or questions that you have, please let me know. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.